Whether it was due to simply not being the right thespian for the protagonist's job out of the gates, or delivering a leading turn that didn't produce what many have been hoping for heading into theatres. There's no denying that these actors just didn't quite nail the good life, or seemingly just weren't built to be bad. Well, it's not for everyone, I suppose. And with that in mind, I'm Gareth from Whatculture.com, and here are actors who were miscast as the villain and hero. Riz Ahmed as Riot, and Carlton Drake, Venom. More than proving he's up to the task of delivering some of the most complex and intriguing characters thrown into theatres in recent times, fans had every reason to believe Riz Ahmed would once again knock it out of the cinematic park the second his casting as Venom's Big Beard was made official. Yet far from forging another iconic Spider-Verse villain to remember upon letting loose his version of Carlton Drake / Riot in that 2018 slice of Sony carnage, no, not that guy, that came later, Ahmed found himself being entirely overshadowed by Tom Hardy's manic work as Eddie Brock / Venom in the picture. Not exactly helped by the fact he was saddled with some pretty horrendous writing, Ahmed seemed to simply get lost when under such a villainous spotlight, and produced arguably his most boring and unmemorable work to date amidst one of the most chaotic films in its genre, which is some feat. Ahmed himself has also been quick to note how he simply wasn't equipped with the skill set to produce the technical thing and the emotional thing in a film of Venom's size when shooting the symbiote flick. So here's hoping he'll be in a better position to deliver the goods if and when he decides to return to blockbuster filmmaking. We know he's got it in him, but it just didn't really work here, did it? Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates, Psycho. In the case of Vince Vaughn attempting to do his best to live up to the billing of being the second coming of Psycho's Norman Bates, throwing the relative newcomer into such sizable shoes had the potential to be a masterstroke if Gus Van Sant managed to pull a performance from his star as equally unexpected and eventually unsettling as Anthony Perkins' work in the original. Sadly, trying to recapture lightning in a bottle with such an instantly iconic character, and film for that matter, isn't as easy as shooting the entire thing again in colour with new actors and hoping for the best. But it was Vaughn's fidgety and uncomfortable for all the wrong reasons work as Bates that still sits as the most jarring element of a wholly pointless remake, with the swingers thespian doing little more than a badly pitched impression of what he classed as a madman during the 1998 flop. Vaughn has since proven he definitely possesses some serious acting chops, but he simply wasn't the star for the unenviable Psycho job in those early days. Harrison Ford as Dr. Norman Spencer, What Lies Beneath. Harrison Ford has tried his hand at everything from neo-noir sci-fi to straight-up heavyweight drama, and often smashed it out of the park in only the way this gruff icon can. Yet one avenue the Hollywood legend has very rarely wandered down is that of the sinister antagonist on the big screen. But that all changed somewhat with his first real walk on the dark side, towards the back end of Robert Zemeckis' What Lies Beneath in 2000. Trying to fully get behind the idea of the same actor who'd spent a career cracking wise and whips with a twinkle in his eye wasn't all that easy for some of the star's fans, however, with many struggling to fully invest in Ford's work as a Dr. Norman Spencer, who eventually reveals he killed a student who threatened to expose their affair to the dean, all before trying to murder his wife shortly after, of course. And while Ford definitely appears to be having the time of his bloody life in the creepy role, with his ooh too cold reaction to some bathtub water mid-attempt to kill Michelle Pfeiffer's Claire being particularly memorable, some simply couldn't connect with Han Solo as a murdering nutjob in the end. Russell Crowe as Javert, Les Miserables. Boasting the sort of CV that has showcased just how damn diverse a thespian Russell Crowe can be on his best day, his work in 2012's big screen take on Les Miserables was sadly anything but that when all was said and done. Now that may be slightly harsh, admittedly. When it comes to the actual acting involved in bringing into existence the driven and dedicated police inspector hell-bent on bringing Jean Valjean to justice, Crowe brings his usual brand of simmering intensity to Javert with just the right amount of vulnerability to make his fearsome antagonist entirely human. Yet in a film that opted to record its legendary musical numbers live on set, instead of polishing them up in a studio and having actors lip sync on the day, Crowe's singing chops ultimately stuck out like a sore thumb in comparison to the rest of his warbling castmates. Again, it's not that the Academy Award-winning legend is tone deaf by any means, but when sharing a tune with someone of the musical talent of a Hugh Jackman or Anne Hathaway, Crowe's basic skill set simply didn't provide Javert with the sort of powerful vocal foundation needed in such a dominant and menacing figure. Eddie Redmayne as Barnum Abraxas, Jupiter Ascending. Heading over to another Les Miserables alumni now, and yet another star who looked to be on something of a roll heading into their most villainous challenge to date. Yet all of the Oscars' buzz and glory couldn't save Eddie Redmayne from a critical drubbing for his questionable work on the star's follow-up to The Theory of Everything. Along with not exactly exuding dread from every pore to begin with, the British sensation's decision to deliver his lines as Bale Abraxas in a whispery way during Jupiter Ascending in response to the character having his larynx ripped out by a wolfman was divisive to say the least. So much so that the the actor quite rightly took home the Golden Raspberry for Worst Supporting Actor for his odd turn in the end. One that saw him go from screaming rage monster to sinister baddie in need of a glass of water on the turn of a dime. And with the star himself even admitting that yeah, it was a pretty bad performance on my account later down the road, it's safe to say Redmayne just wasn't ready to go full Abraxas at that particular moment. Poor Giamatti as Rhino, the Amazing Spider-Man 2. Given the right opportunity to shine, even the most talented, serious thespians in the game hold the potential to create larger-than-life big-screen gold. And Paul Giamatti in particular proved this in his scene-stealing work as Nilo in Jungle Cruise. Seriously, it was bloody good stuff. Yet when tasked with doing the same thing during Sony's The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Giamatti wasn't really given the platform to live long in the memory. Spouting out a frankly absurd Russian accent, and sporting a Rhino suit that even Arnold Schwarzenegger would think twice about donning, Giamatti felt entirely wasted as a hardly intimidating slapstick fool of a barely even secondary villain who quickly finds himself being bested by a returning Spider-Man late in the day. Given more of a spotlight to create something that wasn't just a meaningless throwaway soundbite of a part, Giamatti could have likely smashed the role of Alexei Sitsevich too. Instead, what fans got was an all-round waste of the actor's talents, a role that should have likely been filled by a lesser-known up-and-coming talent, and a character the actor himself is clearly all too happy to leave behind in this new multiversal landscape. Topher Grace as Venom, Spider-Man 3. Some 7 years before Paul Giamatti found himself unleashing one of the dodgiest turns of his career as a Spidey antagonist, Topher Grace proved that some folks just are not cut out for the supervillain life. Or more specifically, they are not cut out to play one of the most menacing and often frightening comic book antagonists of all time. With the That 70s Show star himself also being somewhat shocked that Sony felt he was the person for the Eddie Brock job, his sentiments were shared by many a fan of the iconic symbiote heading into Sam Raimi's threequel, and in the end they were largely right to question the unexpected call as it goes. Never entirely convincing as either the cocky rival of Peter Parker or terrifying beast that eventually consumes the exposed former Daily Bugle employee through no real fault of Grace's, the actor was just out of his depth when faced with the complicated task of juggling two notable comic book personalities. Fast forward to 2018 and Tom Hardy showcased brilliantly what the characters could be on the cinematic stage when boasting the right material and put in the proper performer's hands. Something Grace himself was all too happy to admit in the lead up to that solo Venom flick too, which was pretty nice of him to be honest. What a guy. Jared Leto as Morbius. It's clear the Oscar-winning Jared Leto enjoys the idea of stretching his acting muscles and challenging himself for the most bizarre and unexpected roles on the market. But in the part of Dr. Michael Morbius during the all-round Sony flop that was Morbius, it's clear the vampire anti-hero path was a challenge too far for the 30 Seconds to Mars frontman. Lacking any of the charm or, fun of his fellow Sony Spider-Man universe leading anti-hero Tom Hardy in the role of Eddie Brock, Leto broods and mumbles his way through the action, and rarely gives those watching on a reason to care in the slightest about his troubled scientist at any point in the runtime. It's not like the painful script aided the leading man's attempts to make Morbin Time anything more than a flash-in-the-pan tweet of the week either, but at least co-star Matt Smith tried to have a bit of a play with the often absurd material sent his way, whereas Leto did next to nothing to elevate Sony's biggest SSMU disaster to date. Scarlett Johansson as the Major, Ghost in the Shell. Ranking as one of the most high-profile pieces of whitewashing in recent times, Scarlett Johansson's casting as Ghost in the Shell's leading light, Major Mira Killian / Matoka Kusanagi, pissed off a great many heading into its 2017 release. And if shoehorning a big Hollywood name into the live-action adaptation of the beloved Japanese manga wasn't enough controversy for one blockbuster flick, the fact the film ultimately attempted to address the reasons behind this seemingly unnecessary casting by revealing that Johansson's Killian was actually a Japanese woman all along, her brain was transferred to a Caucasian shell, brought even more unwanted headlines. Can never have too many, can you? All in all, the wiser and braver call would have been to simply cast a Japanese actor in such an iconic Japanese role, instead of unleashing a rather bizarre twist on the film's audience that only added to the controversy surrounding it. In fairness to the eventual leading heroine, Johansson drew decent enough reviews for her work as the Major in the end, but the fact Ghost in the Shell still didn't exactly mop up at the box office simply sits as further evidence as to why Paramount should have simply avoided the negative press and cast a Japanese leading lady instead. Dane DeHaan as Valerian in the City of a Thousand Planets. It's pretty safe to say that just about nobody walked out of 2017 sci-fi epic Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets smelling of intergalactic roses. But it was the star behind the ill-fated film's titular leading force that arguably turned in the most underwhelming performance of the lot, largely because of the heights he'd been able to achieve elsewhere in the likes of Chronicle and Lawless. While not entirely unwatchable, Dane DeHaan just didn't exude the level of charisma and magnetism needed to spearhead such a high-profile potential blockbuster film franchise. And both he and Cara Delevingne lacked any real chemistry as a dynamic duo either. Again, DeHaan has shown he's more than up to the task of tackling flawed and complex figures on the big screen on countless occasions throughout his career, but he just didn't command the screen in quite the way one would hope as Major Valerian. Instead, feeling like more of a Keanu Reeves light, during his attempts to establish himself as the cocky yet cool protagonist, this all-out flop was in desperate need of. Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Speak of the devil, or vampire, or person, Keanu Reeves is also no stranger to stepping into the role of lead protagonist and not exactly clicking from start to finish. Boasting outstanding turns in the heroic and anti-heroic saddle on multiple occasions over the decades, the star most definitely holds the potential to smash it out of the park as the leading light. But in the time before stepping into the Matrix, vanquishing demons in Constantine, and kicking all of the ass in John Wick, Reeves found himself a little out of his depth in the blood-sucking world of vampires. Hot on the heels of becoming a star to watch thanks to his Bill and Ted and Point Break showings, the young talent was brought aboard the Francis Ford Coppola-helmed Bram Stoker's Dracula in the leading role of solicitor Jonathan Harker. Far from proving to be another stepping stone towards superstardom though, Reeves' deeply wooden showing as the flick's protagonist saw the actor being routinely dwarfed on screen by the likes of the larger-than-life Gary Oldman and Anthony Hopkins. Simply put, it just felt like a bit too much too soon for the eventual household name. And the less said about that British accent, the better, eh? Chris Pratt as Owen Grady, Jurassic World. Chris Pratt's highly charismatic and hilarious work as misfit leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy Peter Quill / Star-Lord in 2014 more than set the stage for leading man superstardom. Yet what made Pratt such an engaging presence in that Marvel Studios offering wasn't the fact that he was a convincing action star blessed with bucket loads of gravitas and rugged charm. It was the star's natural, unlikely hero energy and personality that fans instantly connected with, seen again in his successful outing as Emmett in the Lego Movie. That all went missing during his Jurassic debut in 2015, however, with Pratt trading that affable goofball spirit for his best impression of badassery as Dino Wrangler Owen Grady. The fat fellow Marvel megastar Josh Brolin was once considered for the part of this particular Navy veteran tells you all you need to know about what caliber of performer was likely needed to pull off the leading force in the Jurassic World franchise. And sure, Pratt definitely looks the part as the wisecracking, grizzled dino expert, but the character doesn't really allow him to showcase what brought him to the party in the first place, and feels like a role designed for someone else entirely, a feeling that only became even more prevalent as the series unfolded. Edward Norton as Bruce Banner / the Hulk, the Incredible Hulk. For every game-changing Robert Downey Jr. and Chadwick Boseman call, there has still been the odd misstep from Marvel Studios' casting department, and Edward Norton likely sits at the top of the list in terms of actors who just didn't sync up with what the MCU was looking to achieve going forward. Clearly ranking as one of the finest actors of his generation on the back of stellar work in everything from American History X and Fight Club, securing a thespian of Norton's caliber felt like a bit of a no-brainer at the time. But once the dust eventually settled on his work as the Incredible Hulk, it was evident Marvel had dropped the ball a touch in not casting first-choice Mark Ruffalo for the Bruce Banner role. Despite clearly putting his everything into forging his version for the Big Green Force, rewriting much of the script, Norton never truly felt like the perfect fit for the genius presence battling against his Gamma alter ego. Simply put, as Banner, he just lacked the ability to convincingly balance being both a lovable soon-to-be Avenger and genuinely uncontrollable rage monster on the turn of a dime. But a very public falling out with Marvel later, one which saw Kevin Feige pretty much class Norton as anything but a team player, Ruffalo finally got the chance to prove precisely why he was Louis Leterrier's first choice Bruce all along. Christian Bale as John Connor, Terminator Salvation. Christian Bale has shown on a few occasions that he knows a thing or two about playing a layered and complicated hero on the big screen. Look at his Batman. I mean, just look at his Batman. And that's what made the concept of Bale rocking up as another iconic hero in the form of none other than John Connor himself in 2009's Terminator Salvation such an intriguing one from the second his casting became official. But instead of unleashing yet another memorable figure to add to his already stellar collection of cinematic characters, Bale justified his decision to turn down the role on 3 occasions in the lead up to agreeing to appear. Classed as one-dimensional by some critics and dull by others, Bale just didn't captivate in the slightest as the husky-voiced so-called savior of humanity, and this felt like an example of the star just not being all that inspired by the material he was given to play with in the end. Would the film in general have worked any better had Bale accepted the role originally offered to him of Sam Worthington's Marcus Wright? Who knows? But what's certain is that the Dark Knight superstar's turn as Connor was about as human as a T-800. Thankfully, unlike Arnie, he was not back for more.